It was late October when my coworker asked me for a favor. He and his wife were flying out of state for a funeral, and they didn't want to leave their house completely unattended for the weekend. I'd been to their place before, quiet suburban area, a small dead-end street with woods lining the back of their property. It was peaceful. He just wanted someone to stay overnight, maybe keep a light on. I didn't mind. I brought a book, downloaded a few movies, and looked forward to a quiet weekend. The first night, Friday, was uneventful. I ordered food, walked around the house to make sure the doors and windows were locked, and went to bed in their guest room around midnight. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint crunching sound, leaves or gravel somewhere outside. I sat still, trying to figure out if it had come from the backyard or if I imagined it. The bedroom window faced the rear of the house, so I walked over, pushed the curtain aside, and looked out. The motion light had kicked on, casting a dim cone of yellow across the snow-dusted yard. At first, I saw nothing. But then, just at the edge of the woods, I spotted someone. A figure, still, facing the house, too far to see any detail, but they were standing with this stiff posture like they were waiting for something. I stared for what felt like a long time, hoping they would move or turn away. They didn't. Eventually, the motion light flicked off, and with it, the figure disappeared into the dark. I stepped back from the window and stood there a while listening. No sounds, no more movement. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I walked out into the yard. It had snowed lightly. There were a few tracks near the tree line, but they weren't clear. They could have been animal prints, I wasn't sure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing there, watching the house. That evening, just before it got dark, I noticed the back door's deadbolt was slightly turned. Not fully unlocked, but not latched either. I always check locks. I double-checked them the night before. I locked it again, this time making sure the handle and the bolt were both secure. Around midnight, I was in the living room watching a movie when I heard 3 distinct knocks on the sliding glass door to the backyard. My whole body froze. I stared toward the dark glass door, the blinds still drawn. The knocks hadn't sounded like a polite tap. They were heavier, deliberate. I walked quietly to the door and peeked between the blinds. No one was there. Still, I opened the blinds a little more and shined my phone's flashlight into the yard. The motion light didn't come on this time, but just beyond its range, I saw something. It looked like a shape just behind the tree closest to the shed. Not clearly visible, more like the suggestion of a person, half hidden by the trunk. I quickly shut the blinds and locked the door again. I stood there for a while, holding my phone, my heart pounding. I should have called the police, but I didn't. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Before heading to bed, I noticed something strange on the kitchen table. A small, dead leaf. Brown, curled at the edges. It hadn't been there earlier, and I hadn't brought it in. I hadn't opened the back door. It was just there in the middle of the table. I tossed it in the trash, locked myself in the guest room, and kept a light on in the hallway all night. I barely slept. When I finally got up the next morning, I was ready to leave. I packed up, texted my coworker, and started making rounds to lock up. That's when I noticed the key hook by the back door. There were 4 hooks, one for the house key, one for a spare car key, one labeled garage, and one labeled shed. Now, all 4 hooks were empty. I knew I hadn't touched them. I went to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. Everything looked still, quiet. But the shed door was open. Wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. I didn't go outside. I just grabbed my bag, locked the front door, and left. Later that night, after my co-worker had returned, I got a message from him. He asked if I had gone into the shed during the weekend. I told him no and asked why. He sent a picture. Inside the shed, leaning against the wall, was a dusty old full-length mirror, covered in streaks. But clearly visible in the bottom corner of the reflection was the back door. And behind the glass, a blurry shape. Not mine, not his wife's. Just a dark figure standing still, facing the door. I arrived in the small town of Marrow's Hollow on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't on any map I used. My GPS had glitched for nearly an hour, rerouting me off the highway, down a cracked rural road, and eventually past a weathered wooden sign that just said, "Welcome to Marrow's Hollow. Stay a while." I was supposed to be staying in a cabin I'd rented online for a weekend retreat. Nature, silence, solitude, that was the plan. What I found instead was a house, not a cabin. A single-story white house with dark green shutters, surrounded by woods so thick you couldn't see beyond the first line of trees. The house key was in a rusted tin box under the mat, exactly as described, but the place didn't match the photos. It wasn't just that the furniture was older or the floorboards more worn. It was something deeper. The rooms felt rearranged, as if someone had taken the exact house I booked and shifted everything just slightly out of place. I should have left then, but I didn't. Inside, everything was still. Not quiet still. No ticking clocks, no hum of electricity, no wind through the windows. Just nothing. The only sound was the slight scuff of my shoes against the old wooden floor. The first strange thing I noticed was in the hallway, a light switch plate with 3 switches. Only 2 of them worked. The first turned on the hallway light, the second controlled the porch, but the third, nothing. I flipped it up and down, no clicks, no response, just dead. That night, as I tried to sleep, I noticed something odd about the layout of the house. The hallway had 3 doors. One led to the bathroom, one to the bedroom I was using, but the third one, locked. No mention of it in the listing. The doorknob was cold, colder than the rest of the house. It didn't rattle when I tried it, didn't shake, just sat there like a sealed mouth. I went to bed trying not to think about it. At around 2:40 a.m., I woke up suddenly. There was no noise, no nightmare, just the sharp feeling that something had changed. The air felt heavier, denser. I sat up, heart already racing. The hallway light was on. I hadn't left it on. I got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. That dead stillness from earlier was gone. Now the air felt like it was pressing against me. As I passed the light switch, I noticed something else. All 3 switches were down, but the hallway light was on. I stared at it for a long time. Then slowly I reached out and flipped the 3rd switch. There was a sound, not in the hallway, but behind the locked door. It was soft, like the turning of gears. I stood there frozen, staring at the door. Something in me knew that sound hadn't been mechanical. It had felt awake. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed until morning. I didn't sleep. The next day, I walked the outside of the house. I wanted to see what was behind that third door. Maybe it was a closet, a storage room. But when I paced it out from the outside, it didn't add up. From the outside, the house only had 2 rooms on that side. But inside, the hallway clearly had 3 doors. The space behind the third door should not have existed. That night, I left every light on, every door open. I taped a small piece of paper over the third switch so I wouldn't touch it by mistake. But sometime during the night, I woke up again. No lights were on. The piece of paper I'd taped was on the floor. The third switch was up, and the hallway was darker than it had ever been. Not like the lights were off, but like the hallway itself wasn't there anymore. Just a long stretch of blackness that didn't reflect anything. I stood in the doorway, watching it. And I swear, just for a second, I saw a shape at the far end. Thin, not moving, not even breathing. Just there. Then it stepped back, and the lights flickered back on. The third switch clicked down by itself. The next morning, I packed without brushing my teeth, without breakfast, without looking back. As I drove away, the town sign was gone. Just trees, as if the place had folded in behind me. I tried to look up Merrow's Hollow again later. I found nothing, no listing, no town, not even a mention of the house. But the worst part, last week in my apartment, I noticed something while replacing a broken light bulb in the hallway. A light switch plate with 3 switches, 2 work. The third does nothing. I haven't touched it since. I was house-sitting for my aunt at her place, a modest 2-story home just off a quiet back road, about 15 miles outside Asheville, North Carolina. It sat on a wide patch of land surrounded by trees, with no neighbors in direct view. Closest house was maybe a quarter mile away, the kind of place that feels peaceful in daylight. Nothing around but woods and wind. I got there Thursday evening. Scout, her old shepherd mix, greeted me at the door. The house was colder than I expected. Everything looked normal, but the air inside felt dense, like it hadn't been breathed in a while. I fed Scout, double-checked that all doors and windows were locked, and headed up to the guest room. Before bed, I took a quick look through the house. Habit more than paranoia. The only odd thing I noticed was a faint discoloration near the attic door in the hallway ceiling. Water damage, maybe. Or just old wood. I didn't think much of it. Around midnight, the wind outside had died completely. I'd just switched off the lamp when I heard it. A soft knock, faint but deliberate, not from outside. It came from within the house, somewhere down the hall or inside the walls. Scout, normally calm, started pacing downstairs. A few minutes later, another knock, this time closer, followed by a third right outside the guest room. I held my breath. No footsteps, no shifting floorboards, just silence. I waited several minutes before opening the door. The hallway was empty, but the air had changed. It was warmer, slightly humid, and carried a faint sour metallic scent, like rust or old blood. The nightlight at the end of the hall flickered and went out. Scout was standing still at the foot of the stairs, staring up at me. His ears were pinned back. He wasn't barking, just watching. Then I saw the footprints, wet, barefoot, human-sized, trailing in from the back of the house to the stairs. I followed them cautiously. Every door and window was still locked. No signs of entry, no shattered glass. But my phone was dead. It had been on the charger all evening. Now it wouldn't even power on. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I grabbed the fireplace poker and cracked open the front door. The night air was heavy and damp, and the forest around the house was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind, just thick stillness. That's when I saw it, right by the gravel drive, in the path of the car tires. A narrow plank of wood covered in rusted nails laid flat and ready. I hadn't noticed it earlier, and it wasn't something someone would accidentally drop. I stepped back into the doorway, heart pounding. Then I heard it. Slow movement upstairs, deliberate pacing, one foot dragging slightly. It was the kind of sound that felt meant to be heard. Scout growled, deep and unfamiliar. I didn't wait. We backed out fast and made for the car. I didn't look up until I reached the end of the driveway. One of the upstairs windows was open. Behind the glass was a silhouette, tall, still, facing outward. I drove to a gas station 10 miles away and called the sheriff's department. Deputies searched the house that night. They found nothing, no forced entry, no signs of anyone hiding. But the footprints I saw had vanished, not even a smudge. The only thing they found was in the attic. Behind some insulation was a small, old, battery-powered tape recorder, still running. The tape had been recorded days earlier. It captured mostly static, but every few minutes a sound, like someone walking. Then a low voice whispering something unintelligible. And finally, what sounded like the attic door creaking open. That alone was disturbing. I've lived in this neighborhood for about 5 years. It's the quiet, older part of town with single-story homes, tidy lawns, and neighbors who generally keep to themselves. Nothing dramatic ever really happens here. The house across the street had been empty for several months after the last owners moved out suddenly. It sat dark and still all that time. Then, one afternoon, I noticed an old silver sedan with out-of-state plates in the driveway. I saw a man moving in that weekend. Mid to late 30s, average build, dark hair, nondescript clothes. He brought in a couple of boxes, but there was no moving truck, no visible furniture. He never introduced himself or waved. He just went inside and closed the blinds. Even at night, he didn't turn on any lights I could see from the street. At first, I shrugged it off. Some people are private. But after about a week, I noticed something strange. Every night between midnight and 1, the same silver sedan would leave the driveway, headlights off. It would roll slowly down the street in the dark before finally turning them on near the corner. I only noticed because I'm a light sleeper and my bedroom window faces the street. The first time I thought nothing of it. Maybe he worked a night shift, but it happened every single night. Same routine, same time. Always with the lights off until he was almost out of sight. A few days later, I was taking out the trash around 9 p.m. and saw something that stuck with me. His front door was wide open. No movement, just a dark open doorway to an unlit house. I stood there for a minute trying to see if anyone would come out or go in. Nothing. Eventually, I went back inside, feeling unsettled. When I checked an hour later, the door was closed again. The next morning, I decided to take a better look in daylight. I walked across the street and pretended to be checking my mailbox. From there, I could see his front yard clearly. What caught my eye was the grass. It was flattened in a neat, narrow path, running from the front door straight across the lawn to the street, like someone had walked the exact same path over and over. But there were no footprints, no mud, just a worn, pressed-down line in the grass. I tried to tell myself it was none of my business, but the weirdest part came a couple of days later. I woke up around 2 a.m. because of a noise outside. Not banging or yelling. It was the sound of an engine idling. I peeked through my blinds and saw his sedan, parked in front of my house. Headlights off, engine running. I couldn't see inside because of the tinted windows. It sat there for maybe 5 minutes before slowly rolling away, silent as it had come. The next day, I called the non-emergency police line. I explained everything. Someone new in the area acting suspicious, leaving at odd hours, parking in front of my house in the middle of the night. They sent a patrol car that evening. I watched them knock on his door. No answer. They circled the house, shined flashlights in the windows, talked to me briefly. They said the place looked empty. That night, his car was gone. I didn't see it again for 2 days. Then one morning, I got up early for work and saw it was back in his driveway. Driver's door slightly open. Keys still in the ignition. No one around. I waited, watching from my porch with my coffee. No one came to get the car. By late afternoon, I called the police again. They checked it out. They eventually went inside the house. Empty. No furniture. No boxes. Nothing at all. The sedan was towed away. I asked the officer what would happen next. He said they'd try to trace the owner, but as far as he knew, the house had no current renter on record. It had been supposed to be vacant. Nothing's happened since then. No one's moved in. But I still remember standing on my porch with my coffee, watching that car in the driveway with the door hanging open, waiting for someone who never came back.